December 10, 1986. United States District Court, Eastern District of New York, Brooklyn. A 73-year-old man shuffled through the courtroom doors, unshaven, wearing a rumpled blue blazer that hung off him like it belonged to someone bigger, someone he used to be. Paul Vario, capo regime of the Lucchese crime family, the man who once controlled JFK Airport like a personal bank vault, who earned $25,000 a day and commanded fear across 3 boroughs. He fell limply into a wooden chair and could not speak. His lawyer stood up and begged for him. In light of his age and serious medical disabilities, any sentence could amount to a death sentence. Judge Joseph McLaughlin gave him 6 more years. Vario did not react. He just sat there, staring at nothing, while 2 U.S. Marshals waited to take him back to a cell he would never leave. Paul Sorvino played him in Goodfellas. Paulie Cicero, the quiet patriarch who sliced garlic with a razor blade and governed with a raised eyebrow. Scorsese ended Paulie's story with a dignified turn of the back and $3,200 in an envelope. Clean, cinematic, and completely fabricated. The real Paul Vario did not get a clean exit. He got lung cancer on a cell floor in Fort Worth, Texas, 1,500 miles from Brooklyn, with no one waiting at the hospital. This is the story of the man Hollywood sanitized. From a rape conviction at age 23 to the most profitable crew captain in the Lucchese family, from the father figure who raised Henry Hill to the man who slept with Hill's wife and then voted to have him murdered. This is the ending. Goodfellas never showed. Paul Frank Vario Sr. was born July 10, 1914, in New York City. His parents, Pietro and Mary, were immigrants from Arese, Sicily, a hilltop town where silence was not a virtue, it was survival. They landed in East New York, Brooklyn, which in the 1920s was the kind of neighborhood where the line between working and stealing was drawn in chalk. Paul was one of 5 brothers. Every single one of them went into organized crime. Not one Vario boy went straight. Think about that. 5 sons, 5 criminals. That's not bad luck. That's infrastructure. By age 11, Paul was sentenced to 7 months in juvenile detention for truancy, not for violence, not for theft, for refusing to show up to school. The system flagged him early and then lost him completely. By his early 20s, he was running errands for local gangsters, building the only resume that mattered in East New York: reliability, silence, and a willingness to do what was asked without questions. Then he destroyed whatever was left of his legitimate future. At 23, Vario was convicted of raping a 16-year-old girl. The sentence was 10 to 20 years at Sing Sing. The film never touched this, not a hint. Paul Sorvino's Paulie Cicero was cold, quiet, capable of ordering violence, but the movie version carried a kind of dignity. The real Vario carried a sex crime conviction before he was old enough to rent a car. He was paroled twice from Sing Sing and sent back both times, once for burglary, once for dealing stolen property. He did not walk free for good until 1962. He was 48 years old. Most men at 48 are deep into a career, raising teenagers, thinking about retirement. Vario was just getting started. The previous Brooklyn crew captain for the Lucchese family had stepped down. His ally Joseph Scavo declined the position and recommended Vario. Within months, Paul Vario was capo regime, captain of what became the Canarsie crew. You have to understand what Vario built. His brothers weren't just family, they were departments. Leonard controlled construction unions and collected tribute from contractors. Thomas ran bookmaking and loan sharking at job sites. Salvatore operated floating card and dice games and paid off cops. And Vito, Tutti, ran the Euclid Avenue taxi cab and limousine service and Presto Pizzeria, both directly across the street from a tenement where an 11-year-old kid named Henry Hill was watching everything. In 1955, Hill wandered into Tutti's cab stand looking for an after-school job. He was 11 or 12. He started parking cars, running errands, serving drinks at card games. By 13, he had met Jimmy Burke, who tipped like a man trying to buy loyalty. $20 here, $20 there. By 14, the Varios had handed Hill a union card in the bricklayer's local. He was paid $190 per week for a job he never showed up to. Hill dropped out of school. The cab stand became his education. Paul Vario became the father. Henry's own father never was. Hill's dad was an electrician who beat his kids. Vario was the man who taught him how the world actually worked, or at least how it worked in Brooklyn. He arranged Henry's first date with Karen Friedman through his son Paul Jr. He watched over Hill's career with the possessive pride of a patriarch grooming an heir. The film captured this relationship with extraordinary tenderness. What it didn't capture is how completely Vario would betray it. Because here's what Goodfellas buried. While Henry was locked up at Lewisburg Federal Penitentiary, Paul Vario, the man Henry treated like a father, was sleeping with Karen Hill, his protege's wife. And when Tommy DeSimone tried to assault Karen during that same period, Vario was not outraged on principle. He was territorial. Karen was his. Vario's response was calculated and lethal. He revealed DeSimone's unauthorized murders of Gambino associates Billy Batts and Foxy Girothi to the Gambino family. That information was a death sentence. Vario's own son, Peter, drove DeSimone to his execution in January of 1979. Tommy's body was never found. That's the man behind Paulie Cicero, not the quiet patriarch who governed with a raised eyebrow. A rapist, an adulterer, a man who would sleep with his surrogate son's wife and then sign another man's death warrant to protect his claim on her. Servino found something dead in the eyes to play Cicero. The real Vario had something dead much deeper than that. But none of it would have mattered, none of the violence, none of the betrayals, without the money. John F. Kennedy International Airport. Henry Hill called it their personal city bank. Whenever they needed money, they just went to the airport. FBI wiretaps from the 80s captured Lucchese members saying it plainly. They said it, "We own JFK," and they were not exaggerating. Jimmy Burke's crew paid off truck drivers, typically $50 a head, and hijacked cargo loads worth $10,000 to $100,000 each, 2 or 3 times a week. Vario's union connections provided no-show jobs across the terminals, and his crew extorted over $350,000 from air cargo companies, threatening crippling labor strikes unless they paid for what Vario called labor peace. At his peak, Vario's operation generated roughly $25,000 per day. That added up to $9 million a year in the 1970s, more than $55 million adjusted for today. He was the most profitable capo in the Lucchese family. He answered to bosses Carmine Tramunti and later Tony Dux Corallo, but his earning power gave him weight far beyond his rank. The Air France robbery in April of 1967 netted $480,000. Hill paid Vario $60,000 in tribute before the crime was even reported. But that was a warm-up. The real score was coming. December 11th, 1978. 3 a.m. 6 masked men walked into Lufthansa's cargo terminal at JFK. 64 minutes later, they walked out with approximately $5 million in untraceable cash and $875,000 in jewelry. Nearly $28 million in today's money, the largest cash robbery in American history at the time. The money and jewelry were never recovered. The chain of information ran straight through Vario's world. A Lufthansa cargo worker named Louis Werner, buried in gambling debts, told his bookmaker Martin Krugman about the cash. Krugman told Hill. Hill brought it to Burke. Burke sought approval from Vario, who was in Florida. Vario greenlit the heist by telephone and insisted Burke supervise personally. He sent his son Paul Jr. to collect his cut, estimated between $2 and $3 million. What followed was an extermination. Burke, paranoid that anyone who knew about the heist would eventually talk, began systematically murdering the participants. Parnell Edwards, Martin Krugman, Louis and Joanna Cafora, Robert McMahon, Joe Manri, Teresa Ferrara, whose dismembered body washed up in a New Jersey river. At least a dozen people connected to the robbery were killed or vanished in the months that followed. The score that should have secured the crew's future planted the seeds of its annihilation. And through all of it, Henry Hill was watching, learning, and falling apart. After his parole from Lewisburg in July of 1978, Hill had gone back to crime, but now he was dealing drugs: marijuana, cocaine, heroin, quaaludes. He was wholesaling narcotics between Brooklyn and Pittsburgh, making enormous money and developing a cocaine addiction that was eating him alive. This was a direct violation of Vario's rule against drug dealing, a rule Vario himself ignored when it suited him, having financed at least a $1.5 million cocaine shipment. On April 27, 1980, narcotics detectives arrested Henry Hill on drug trafficking charges. During the bust, Karen flushed $60,000 worth of cocaine down the toilet. The family was broke overnight. Hill was facing decades in prison. Then, the FBI played him 2 recordings. In the first, associates Angelo Sepe and Anthony Stabile told Burke that Hill was no good and was a junkie. They wanted him dead. In the second, the one that changed everything, Burke told Vario directly that Hill needed to be whacked. The men who had been his family for 25 years had voted on his murder. Even then, Hill fought it. When officers mentioned prosecutor Edward McDonald, Hill screamed at them. He was convinced Burke had corrupt cops inside who would kill him first. The final push came when Burke invited Hill to meet at a bar Hill had never been to, a transparent setup, and then asked him to fly to Florida to carry out a hit. Hill had never been asked to kill anyone before. He knew the trip was one way. On May 27, 1980, Henry Hill signed a cooperation agreement with the Department of Justice. He, Karen, and their 2 children entered the Witness Protection Program. The boy from across the street was about to burn down everything Paul Vario had built. Hill's testimony was a bonanza. He wasn't a boss. He wasn't even a made man. But he was an earner who knew something about everything: the no-show jobs, the airport extortion, the hijackings, the gambling, the loan sharking. The entire architecture of the Vario crew was laid open in a federal courtroom by the kid Vario had raised from childhood. Approximately 50 convictions followed, including the one that mattered most. On February 9, 1984, Paul Vario was convicted of defrauding the federal government, arranging a fake restaurant job for Hill so Hill could demonstrate employment and make parole. He received 4 years in federal prison and a $10,000 fine. While serving that sentence, Vario was indicted again for racketeering conspiracy, the JFK extortion that had squeezed over $350,000 from cargo companies. On December 10, 1986, Vario returned to Judge Joseph McLaughlin's courtroom for sentencing. A UPI reporter described what walked through the door: a 73-year-old man, unshaven, wearing a rumpled blue blazer, who fell limply into a chair and let his lawyer do the talking. His attorney begged for mercy, saying in light of his age and serious medical disabilities, any sentence could amount to a death sentence. McLaughlin gave him 6 more years and a $25,000 fine. The man who once commanded an empire generating millions a year, who could order a beating with a glance, who had politicians and union bosses and crooked cops lining up to pay tribute, sat unshaven and limp while a lawyer pleaded for his life. That courtroom was the real ending of Paulie Cicero. Not a turned back, not dignified silence. A broken old man who couldn't speak for himself. Vario was sent to the Federal Correctional Institution in Fort Worth, Texas, 1,500 miles from Brooklyn. He would never leave federal custody alive. The aftermath was a complete annihilation. Burke was convicted of murder. A con artist named Richard Eaton found hogtied and hanging in a meat freezer and sentenced to 20 years to life. He died of lung cancer in a Buffalo prison in 1996 at 64. DeSimone had been dead since 1979, buried somewhere no one ever found. Tony Ducks Corallo, the boss above Vario, received 100 years in the commission trial. Vario's crew was taken over by Alphonse Darco, who eventually became acting boss of the entire Lucchese family, then flipped and became a government witness himself. And Hill spent 30 years as a drug-addled celebrity punchline, selling paintings on eBay and hawking spaghetti sauce, arrested over and over before dying of heart failure in 2012. The mob never killed him. That might have been the cruelest punishment of all. Here is what Goodfellas could not tell you, because it would have ruined the myth. Mob loyalty is a transaction dressed in the language of family. Vario slept with his protege's wife, then voted to have that protege murdered when he became inconvenient. Hill destroyed the man who raised him to save his own skin. Burke killed his own crew to cover his tracks. Every relationship in the Vario orbit was reducible to a single question: what can you do for me right now, and what happens when you cannot? The blood oaths, the code of silence, the generations of omerta, all of it was defeated by one cocaine addict who was more afraid of dying than of breaking his word. 50 convictions from one mid-level earner who was never even a made man. On May 3, 1988, Paul Vario was found unconscious on the floor of his cell in Fort Worth. He was rushed to St. Joseph Hospital. No one was waiting for him. The garlic he once sliced paper thin in Lewisburg was 2 decades and 1,000 miles away. The crew was gone. The money was gone. The family that was never really a family had already moved on to the next capo, the next earner, the next disposable soldier. He was 73 years old. The cause of death was respiratory failure, lung cancer, and chronic obstructive lung disease. His body was returned to Queens and buried at St. John Cemetery. The coroner's report was his final scene. No music, no credits, just a dead man on a cell floor in Texas, 1,500 miles from home. If this story changed the way you see Goodfellas, subscribe. We drop a new mob documentary every week, pulling the real stories from behind the movies you thought you knew. Here's what I want to know. Do you think Henry Hill made the right call, flipping on the men who raised him? Or did he destroy the only people who ever treated him like family? Drop your answer in the comments. Until next time.